So a common question I get is, do hamsters make good pets? And just like any pet-related decision, there's a lot of factors associated with that. The quick answer is yes. Now, we want to start off by thinking, what are the common traits that hamsters represent, and do those make them good pets? First of all, they tend to be fairly healthy animals, they tend to be fairly easy to take care of, and they also tend to be fairly easy to handle and interact with. All of those are factors that in general make them a pretty decent pet to start with. But just like every other pet, we want to make sure that we align those traits to what we're looking for in a pet before we make that decision. So what about activity? When are hamsters going to be awake and active? So just like many of our exotic companion mammals, hamsters are what we consider crepuscular, which means they're most active during the dusk and the dawn in those low light times of days. That's a great survival mechanism in a wild environment, whereas a prey species, they want to be more active at the times when predators are less active. Now that's natural for them. However, they do tend to slightly adapt to our home environments. So when we're more active, it is potential that they're going to be more active as well, but they still tend to be most active at dawn and dusk and will do a lot of sleeping during the day. So what about, do hamsters tend to bite? Do they tend to be a little bit nippy? I think the simple answer is that just like most of our exotic companion mammals, they're fairly easy to handle and they're fairly easy to interact with. But again, it's important for us to remember that as a prey species, they're constantly looking at their environment and worried about potential threats. Now, how does a hamster respond to a threat, or how does a hamster respond to feeling uncomfortable? They do and can occasionally bite related to that. So with hamsters, what's important is that they're aware that you're there. If you're going to pick them up, we want to make sure they're not sleeping. If they are, we want to make noises and do other things to make them aware that we're there, so that when we scoop them up, they're not surprised, which is unfortunately when they may bite. All right, so what should we feed our hamster? Just like every single pet that you may potentially own, nutrition is the single most important decision that you're going to make as a pet parent, so do your research ahead of time. Naturally, in wild environments, hamsters are omnivores, which means they will feed on plant materials, occasionally insects, and even occasional animal protein if that's available. Mostly what they find in a wild environment, though, is going to be plant-based. So how do we translate that to feeding as most appropriately as we can in a home environment? Number one, we want to start with a uniform, complete and balanced fortified diet. That way, every single bite of that food that they take has the same nutritional profile, from the macro ingredients like fat and protein to the micronutrients like vitamins and minerals. We want to avoid any seed-based or muesli-based diets. On top of that, we want that uniform kibble to make up easily 70 to 75% of their overall diet. The remaining 25%, we want to focus on the biggest diversity of nutrients that we can find. Now that's going to start with appropriate vegetables, appropriate greens, and smaller amounts of fruits, insects, seeds, and even potentially an occasional component of animal protein. So what about different types of hamsters? Well, there's actually over 20 different species of hamsters. However, only about 5 are commonly kept as pets. Probably the most common is the Syrian hamster, also known as the golden or the teddy bear hamster. Not only is this the largest of the commonly kept pet species, but it's also one that tends to do a little bit better being kept by themselves. After the golden hamster, there's 4 lesser common dwarf species. Those would be inclusive of the Campbell, which is also known as the Russian. We think about the white hamster. We also think about the Chinese hamster and the Roborovsky or the robo hamsters. All of those can be commonly kept as pets, although still not as common as the Syrian hamster. So what about common health problems? Unfortunately, just like any pets that we're going to keep, hamsters are known to be a little more prevalent with certain types of diseases. Probably the most common disease that we see in hamsters is what's commonly referred to as wet tail or proliferative ileitis. And this is a disease that causes an imbalance of bacteria in their GI tract that can lead to diarrhea that unfortunately can be life-threatening. Additional to wet tail, we will commonly see problems with their skin or dermatological disease. Respiratory disease is also common. Less commonly, we can see dental problems, and there is even a risk potentially of diabetes or other less common metabolic diseases. So how often should you take your hamster to see your veterinarian? Just like all exotic companion mammal species, we don't routinely vaccinate hamsters for common diseases, but that doesn't change the fact that bringing your munchkin in to see a qualified exotic veterinarian at least once a year is a very important preventative healthcare measure that you can take as a pet parent. In the meantime, there are things that you can monitor and do at home to also be diligent for disease. That includes weighing them at least once a week, doing a quick physical exam on your own accord, and obviously paying attention to things such as appetite, activity level, attitude as a whole, and monitoring stool and urine production. So what about enrichment? Is that something that you should be thinking about as a hamster pet parent? Absolutely, and there's a couple of key ways to look at that. Thinking about natural environmental behaviors, things that they would be doing in a natural environment, such as hiding, chewing, and exploring, those are all behaviors that we should work to provide enrichment that stimulate those natural behaviors. Easy things to do would be looking at things like cardboard rolls, from paper towels or from toilet paper, things you can put hay in and different types of treats, other things such as untreated wood blocks that stimulate natural chewing. Any factors where we can drive mental and physical stimulation in their habitat are extremely beneficial to hamsters. What about the ideal hamster habitat? Again, we want to start by thinking, what would that environment be if they were in a wild environment? They're going to be exploring not only horizontal surfaces, but hamsters can also crawl into things and dig under other things. So the larger the overall floor space of the hamster environment we can provide, the better. We also want to think about a vertical component to that, allowing them to climb up onto different levels within their enclosure, as well as what's the appropriate substrate we're going to use, knowing that hamsters naturally dig to explore their environment.